The Cedaw People's Tribunal concluded by the President's report of August 2021 that the United Kingdom must implement its obligation to introduce a Women's Bill of Rights consistent with the terms and provisions of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Cedaw. That undertaking was given by ratification of Cedaw by the United Kingdom government in 1986, following the signing of Cedaw in 1981. The United Kingdom government entered into the optional protocol to Cedaw in 2004, but it has not adopted Cedaw domestically, despite its undertaking to do so, and to honour by bringing into law the provisions of Cedaw and the general recommendations made under Cedaw by the United Nations Cedaw, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women Committee. The Cedaw People's Tribunal sits again today on the 13th of July, the year 2022, to address one of the most compelling reasons for women's demand for a United Kingdom Women's Bill of Rights. Cedaw Article 3 states, states parties, of which of course the United Kingdom is one, states parties shall take all appropriate measures in all fields, in particular economic and cultural fields, measures including legislation to ensure the full development and advancement of women, to guarantee the exercise and enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Cedaw Article 11 provides that such measures are essential in regard to equal remuneration, including benefits, and to equal treatment in respect of work of equal value and equality of treatment in the evaluation and quality and the value of work. How much is work worth? How much is women's work worth? How much has women's work been devalued relative to men's work? Article 12 refers also to women's right to health and well-being, vital also to today's hearings. As a backdrop also to this issue, General Recommendation number 17 of 1991 affirms as well that all women's work, paid work, as well as unremunerated work, unpaid domestic work, is vital to the gross national product too, although this has never been properly recognised nor acknowledged in or by the United Kingdom. This background is a necessary introduction to today's proceedings. The Cedaw People's Tribunal will hear from witnesses testifying from varying perspectives to the indignity and denial of economic rights visited upon women born in the 1950s in regard to their pension entitlements. So why specifically are we here today? Almost 20 years ago, the United Kingdom Parliament passed the Pensions Act of 1995. This act increased the state pension age for women from 60 years to 65 years in stages between May 2010 and March 2020, so that pension accrual dates for women and men would align. Traditionally, under the law, men gained eligibility to state pension at 65 years, whilst women gained eligibility for state pension at 60 years. This appears to have been centred in culturally traditional stereotypes of women and men and their roles and functions in society.
where there have been very serious allegations of rape or domestic abuse, we know that children are seriously affected if they've been brought up or been exposed to this abuse within the family household. And we know through the Domestic Abuse Act that children are considered victims as a result, even if they haven't been directly exposed. And what I mean by directly is actually seen it themselves. They'll have heard it, they'll understand perhaps some of the more nuanced and intimate effects of domestic abuse. For example, a particular look, or in some situations are more likely to be perpetrators. And then as a consequence of that, how they are affected by the court proceedings, and not only being the resident parent, but also being a victim of domestic abuse.
Everything I've talked about would be encompassed within Cedaw. That's why Cedaw is relevant, because it's so comprehensive and it's so relevant to every aspect of women's lives. So really, you know, there is no good argument against it. It's obviously relevant and obviously central to, if we're really serious about achieving gender equality in the UK.
I think there are so many issues that women are shortchanged on, and that Cedaw can make a difference in our lives. You know, I think it's bonkers in such a wealthy country that things aren't spread equally. But if it takes Cedaw to sort that out, Mrs. Thatcher must have thought we had a need for it to have signed up to it. But there was a woman who was extremely opinionated, informed, and she thought it was a good idea. I mean, nothing was done afterwards, unfortunately, but you know, she saw the need for having Cedaw all that long time ago. So I think, yes, Cedaw is necessary and it will make a difference in many ways.
These women were lost out. It's their entitlement, and we've got to take special measures about that. But it's a one-off. You either take that, you either get it from reserves, and if the reserves aren't sufficient, and over 5 years, but it's an obligation. It's a moral obligation. Those women paid into the system and they were cheated. The deal was changed on them and they were looking forward to retirement. Their plans have been turned upside down. It's a moral duty of this country to put that wrong right, and it cannot continue.
This is a historic injustice. We have to address it. Some of these women have been forced into penury and they were given no adequate notice. They were not properly informed, and it's caused real hardship. And some of these women, if we don't do it now, some of them will no longer be with us. So I think we have a sense of responsibility to address this injustice.
And the fact that women don't have access to the same rights as men is something we should be ashamed of. There are gaps in the Human Rights Act. There are gaps in the Equality Act. I know, as a national advisor to the Welsh Government, that the Welsh Government is committed to the incorporation of Cedaw into Welsh law. I know that Scotland has similar ambitions. We also know that it is challenging to do so without the UK government committing to doing so. You may have, and we may have, gender pay gap legislation. We may have all manner of means by which we can identify why it is that women are being discriminated against. But we don't do enough to tackle that. And unless we have, we can't carry on allowing male privilege, misogyny, patriarchy to dominate our thinking. The pensions gap, the equality gap, the pay gap, the inequality in health gap, you name it. These can only be resolved if we prioritise women's rights, as Cedaw enables us to do that. The business case speaks for itself. The legal and emotional and moral case speaks for itself. And I work, and I will continue to work, with the Cedaw Public Tribunal and anybody that believes in women's rights to ensure that Cedaw and the underlying aims of Cedaw are enshrined in our law.
Is like the women all over this United Kingdom who were born in the 1950s and who were deliberately singled out to bear the burden all alone of the raise in age, the pension age, from 60 to 65 for women. There are several astonishing elements of this process. When the Minister gave the second reading speech back in 1995, he deliberately said that the 1950s women would be targeted, and they were. He ruled out any targeting of women born in the 1940s and, by implication, those born after the 1950s. It's absolutely clear that direct discrimination on the grounds of sex and gender has happened here, and direct discrimination on the grounds of age, because women born in the 1950s were treated less favourably than women born in the 1940s, women born in the 1960s and onwards, and men born in any year whatsoever. Furthermore, there is evidence indisputable that women were not advised of this change, and when they eventually were advised, some of them, it was far too late for them to change their working arrangements, to change their retirement arrangements, and therefore they suffered, and they're continuing to suffer from what is an egregious action on the part of several governments from 1995 onwards. And what is needed here is a meeting with the Prime Minister of the representatives of the women born in the 1950s, and I would be pleased to join that delegation to the Prime Minister before the fiscal statement is released in November this year, because it's essential that what is incorporated into that fiscal statement is an acknowledgement that women born in the 1950s who have suffered from the fact that they have donated to the country the monies that would have been due to them as pension. And it's necessary that a proper, wholesome settlement is determined to be worked out by the Prime Minister and by representatives of the 1950s women. A historical wrong must be remedied, and that is what we are seeking. Thank you.